This is December 4th, 2015. I am Pamela Reeves, and I have the pleasure today of interviewing Donna Raskin-Davis for our Legal History video series. Will you give us your full name, please?
Yes, Donna Raskin-Davis.
And we need your date of birth.
July 31st, 1945.
Now, tell us first a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I was born in Boise, Idaho. My father was in the military, so we did a lot of traveling. When I was 18 months old, we were one of the first families to, to move to the Philippines. At the end of World War II, I lived with a Japanese prison camp in my backyard, a designated area to stay away from landmines. It was a very interesting first 5 years of my life. And then we came back to the States for a little bit, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, and then we headed to Germany where I went to high school till the very end of my high school years. Also interesting, during the Cold War, Berlin Wall, U-2 pilots being shot down. Very interesting time to live in Europe and also very frightening for a teenager.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then you came back to the States and ended up in Memphis for a while.
Yes, I did. I went to nursing school in Memphis. I went to Memphis State in conjunction with my nursing school at Methodist Hospital in Memphis. Graduated from nursing school in 1966.
And became a registered nurse.
Yes, yes.
At some point, though, you made a decision to move to the legal career. So tell us about that transition from being a nurse to being a lawyer.
Well, I was a bit of a rebel, I will have to tell you.
We're not surprised.
No, I guess not. I had a lot of trouble. I was working at a hospital here in Knoxville, and I was really struggling with the fact that there appeared to be one level of care for people with money and another level of care for people without money. And I found that very bothersome, and I complained a lot about it until one day they told me they didn't want to hear my complaints anymore, and involving an issue with a young child. So I impulsively, literally, with no thought ever of having gone to law school before this, got mad and said, well, I think then I'm just going to have to go to law school and come back and make you do what's right. And literally, the next day, I came over and applied to law school.
And how did that experience go?
I loved law school. I think that when you're older, I had worked 10 years before I went to law school. I think when you're older, you come into law school with a very different attitude and life experiences that made law seem much more common sense, but the old stare decisis common sense. And so for me, law school was some of the happiest years of my life.
You say that even though at the time you were juggling 2 small children in addition to law school.
And a part-time job. And a marriage on the rocks. Yeah, it was not, in that respect, it was not easy. Although my children were 5 and 6 years old, in the law school, I went in and said, I was a Winston then. My last name was Winston. So I was at the end of, they divided us up in sections, A through such and such, and like that. So there were 3 sections. The W section had afternoon classes, which were really unacceptable. I had young children who went to school from 8 to 1. So I went in and spoke to them, and I said, could you put me in the morning section? And they were really good about doing that. So that made life much easier. I was in class when my children were in school. I spent the afternoon with them, did what parents do with children. And then once I got them to bed, all I did was study. So.
The mid-70s, mid to late 70s, when you were at the law school, was sort of a time of transition in terms of women in the legal world.
Yes.
Tell me about your experiences from the law school perspective and your first years of practice as a female practicing in a very trial-oriented practice.
I tell you, as far as being a woman in the law school, I really didn't notice any distinction. And it was really kind of an interesting time because this is at the end of the Vietnam War. I mean, right, it had ended, but so there were a lot of veterans coming back in who were in their late 20s, early 30s to law school also. So there were people that were a little more mature and I think much more accepting. Like my children sometimes had to go to school with me. I had a core group of guys that if I would just bring Evel Knievel stunt cycles, they would take the boys down to the student lounge and play with them while I was in class. The truth is, they were playing with the stunt cycles and my kids were watching, but they were wonderful about that. I found the faculty very accepting of women. Where the problem was out in the general world, in the courtrooms and in the law offices.
And you graduated from law school in 1980.
1979, actually.
In
I took the bar in
December
1980. Yeah, the March of 79. And then I took the bar. My father died 6 weeks after I graduated from law school. It was a pretty tumultuous time in my life, very sudden. And so then I took the bar. I guess I was licensed in 1980, so I must take the bar.
February bar.
Yeah, something like that.
And what did you do when you first got out of law school?
Well, I had 2 young children, and I needed to control my life. And as you know, in many of the practices, that first of all, they weren't opening their arms to women, but I had heard some really horror stories about time and being able to be family oriented. So I did something unconventional as usual. I bought an IBM Selectric typewriter, had a phone put in my utility room, which had a little desk in it, and I had a typewriter and a telephone, and I opened up a law practice in my utility room.
I bet the rent was cheap.
And the rent was very cheap. It's all I could afford. And I just met clients. It was funny. I started off doing medical legal consulting. And thanks to Dean Penniger, who was very nice to spread the word to people that I had the medical background. And I just would meet with them in their office. Or when I started getting clients of my own, I would just be honest with them and say, you know, it'd be best if we met at your home or whatever. And we did. They loved it, you know. And pretty soon I was doing so much consulting in Sid Guillory's office that Sid said, well, you know, you really should be over here full time. And I said, well, make me an offer. And he said, well, I would, but we don't have any office space. And I said, you know what? You have a library. And there's a library table, and I'm willing to work off the end of the library table. So he said, all right, we'll do this. Well, it turned out, he came to me later and he said, one of the secretaries has a very big office. How would you feel about sharing an office with the secretary? And I said, it wouldn't bother me at all. I said, you know, I want to be here. I want to work. And so that's what we did. I shared an office with Susan Stogner for probably 2 years until an office became available. And it was wonderful. I learned a lot from her. She was a paralegal. I learned a lot from her.
Now, you list Sid as one of your greatest mentors. Tell me about how Sid impacted your life as a lawyer.
Sid was incredible. You know, Sid Guillory has the ability to treat everyone as though they are probably brighter and more talented than they are. And he literally, it was the learning by being thrown in the fire. He would walk in and hand me a file and say, get this ready for trial, or find me an expert on this and get them ready for trial, or do all the pleadings and the interrogatories. And I had never, in those days we didn't get a lot of pleading training, and I literally would go, Susan, do you have a complaint or something I can read? But he would say, go take these depositions. And I think because there was no question. Here it is, go do it. And that I took on things that I probably would not have voluntarily taken on, very complex things at that stage. And and he would guide me along. If I walked in and said, "What about this?" He'd say, "Well, think about this." But he really was a great mentor.
What kinds of cases were you all working on?
Well, all kinds, but more complex. Medical malpractice, which was a natural with my nursing. We did plane crashes. Sid was a pilot. I did learn to fly while working with him so I could set the plane down if something went wrong. Never got licensed. I just wanted to know how to take it off and set it down. Then we did big products liability cases, a lot of drug product liability cases, and the biggest case was the Velsicol class action case, which was a toxic landfill case that is well recorded, that I spent literally 6 months in trial on the case, plus it took us several years, obviously, to get about 3 or 4 to get it to trial.
Where was this landfill? Remind people about the facts of this particular case.
Yeah, this case happened over in Hardeman County, where Somerville. Toone, Tennessee is the little town that was the most involved. And what happened was Velsicol, which is a chemical company, bought through a straw man this property out in Hardeman County, where they began dumping their chemical waste. And they did it without putting in a clay liner, and they did it over the aquifers that fed this entire community. For about a 3-mile radius, the water and the land was contaminated from it. People started getting skin rashes, they started the cancers, breathing problems, the cattle was dying, they would get, the water was oily, they couldn't be able to drink their water. They went to the EPA, they went to the health department, and they all knew these trucks were coming up and down the road, and they'd ask about it, nobody talked about it. It turned out that all of these chemicals were leaching down through the soil into the water system, and it ended up with the state actually condemning on the tax records, condemning about a 3-mile radius. And then Velsicol said they would put in test wells, but they put them in upstream, which wasn't very helpful. And it was a very complicated case. We had to put together, literally, I went to up to Cincinnati, put together a team of doctors. That was one of my chores to do, was find this team of doctors who would come down and examine all these people in Hardeman County that had been exposed, read all of their past medical records, their current medical records. We had to identify the true class of people. I had to put together immunologists and cancer specialists. It was a very interesting project, stressful, very stressful, and it really taught me how much I appreciate lawyers, because without Sid, who was the lead counsel on this, and there were other attorneys that got involved, these people would never have had a voice, never. As it ended up, there was a very substantial judgment that compensated these people for basically the loss of their land, the use of their land, the illnesses in the family. There had not been a birth in that community in over 3 years. I mean, it had great magnitude.
So where did you try the case?
We started off trying it in Jackson, Tennessee, in federal court in Jackson, Tennessee. When the case, and we would try it in segments. We would try 2 weeks, and then the federal judge would have to hear other cases. And then we'd be off for maybe a week or 2 weeks. Very difficult to try a case when it's being broken up constantly. And so we had elected to try the case only to a judge, because we knew we could never get a jury to sit as long as this case would last. And those were, frankly, Sid made those decisions in the committee, the class committee. But anyway, we ended up where the judge said, I can't be coming up here this much, because so then the case was moved to Memphis, and we tried probably the last 2 or 3 months of it in Memphis.
And how did you juggle your children with this extended, complicated trial?
It was hard. It was very hard. I came home every weekend, of course, to be with the children. My mother came, and my mother helped. And then I didn't have to be, there was 6 months of trial, but I only had to be there for the times when the medical testimony was going on, because that was my niche in the case. That, you know, a case that is that complicated, have different people overseeing different aspects, and then Sid had hired 2 attorneys who literally their whole job was just writing memos and briefs and motions because it was so complex. So my little segment was the medical testimony and preparing witnesses, you know, for their testimony at trial. So sometimes I'd only have to be down there maybe 2 or 3 days of the week. But bless my mother, she came and helped.
Well, now this is one of many cases that you became involved in at a time when it was not common for women to be very active in the courtroom. How did you sort of blaze the trail for women practitioners as a litigator?
You know, I have to tell you, I don't think I ever thought about it much. I didn't have a lot of time to think about it much. I should tell you that as soon as I got out of law school, my husband left me for another gal. The old story. But so I wasn't just a woman practicing law with 2 young children. I was a single mom practicing law with 2 young children. I didn't have a lot of extra time for thinking about a lot of things, but how I dealt with some of the issues. When I had judges who every time there was something came up would say, "Gentlemen, would you approach the bench?" If a jury was in the room, of course I did. But the first opportunity I got after that, either when they said it before the jury came in, I would say, "Your Honor, I am not a gentleman." And almost all of them got the message with my just saying that. I had a few that said, "In this courtroom you will be." And I just would mark it down as an issue that if something went on appeal. Unfortunately, we never got to that, but that was an issue. I had issues where the judges would make comments. I had one of them tell me, I mean, it was flattering, but it was the wrong time to be flattering in the courtroom. "Ms. Davis, you have good-looking legs, but I'm going to have to rule against you." And I mean, you got a jury there. You can't say, "Judge, that was totally inappropriate." The early years, I had a lot of that happening. I had judges who basically, every time I filed a motion, would say, "I'm sure it's frivolous." The same motion could be filed by one of my other male partners, and they'd hear it. I mean, we literally would just change the name on it, and they would hear it. But after about the first 10 years, I realized there was a big change. It was a different, well, one thing was the commission came in that appointed judges rather than them being elected. So some of the good old boy stuff went away, but you now had more competent judges that were being selected because of their knowledge and experience and demeanor, and that, I think, had a big impact on it. I'm not going to tell you it's gone up to today. It's still there a little bit, but it's certainly not terrible now.
Well, a lot of things have changed in the practice of law since you and I started in '79. So talk to us a little bit about some of the changes you've seen.
Well, of course, major is that when you and I started law school, I think there were 25 women in our class of 250. Now the classes are over 50% women, not based on gender, but based on admission scoring, which I think is really pretty terrific. On the flip side, women either are not taking the roles or not being given the roles to lead in practices that equate to the number of women out there, which bothers me to an extent. The second thing that I think's happened is we talked about the commission. In the early days, we would try cases before judges who were not very competent. Now we have a very, very good judiciary. The fact that mediation came in, you know, I went and got certified by the American Arbitration Association because I could see mediation coming down the lane. And because of it, a couple of years later when Tennessee decided they were going to write into the code of mediation, I was given the opportunity to and enjoyed serving on the commission that wrote the rule. That was very enlightening, and it was a lot of fun to do. But now, because of mediation, we see fewer cases tried. I think that has helped the cost of litigation tremendously. But on the other hand, I feel like there's more of an attack on law now than I've ever seen. I mean, you know, we've always had the thing about the jokes about lawyers or, you know, negative comments about attorneys. But it seems that it's moved to a really high level in the legislature. And that's very bothersome because I think one of the basic rights we have is the right to a trial by jury. And that there is a real force out there to take that away. And that would be, in my opinion, very devastating.
Well, I know that there was at least one other case that you felt was one of the most rewarding things you've ever done in your life. Tell us a little bit about that case.
Yeah. I got a call from a lady, a young black woman, who was almost in a state of disbelief when she called me. And she said, you know, several people had told her they would not take her case already. I met with her. I said, well, I'll meet and talk to you. And she was very candid. I've been turned down by other law firms. And when I sat down to talk to her, she said, you know, when I was in college, I got pregnant. And at the time that my baby was due, they decided that they had to do an emergency cesarean section. She said, I was not married when I had the baby. I later married the baby's father. He was with her. He's an accountant now. She said, she said, but I wanted to make sure this was the man I wanted to marry. I don't think you get married just because you're having a baby. I wanted to make sure. And she said, so I would go in for this emergency cesarean section. I have this healthy, beautiful baby. And later I married the father of my first child. And after 3 years, we decided we'd like to have another child. And we tried and could not get pregnant. So I couldn't understand. I'd gotten pregnant so easy. So I went to a fertility specialist here in Knoxville. She was not from Knoxville. And he did some testing, and all he told her was, well, there's a problem with your tubes, and I'm sending you to, that time, Dr. Ray King, who I highly admire, and to see if he can help you. Well, as Dr. King later told me, and it told her, which is what put her in my office, he said, 1 centimeter segments have been cut out of both of your tubes, and your tubes have been tied off.
So in effect, she had been sterilized.
Sterilized without her knowledge or consent. And she lived in a town that where there was a lot of racial prejudice. And so I decided that this was just absolutely wrong. And I talked to Dr. King. He was with us. He said, I have no problem saying this had to have been intentionally done. It was a case that had to go up on, had to be tried on a lot of issues because I had to try it not only on medical malpractice, but also on fraudulent concealment, because the statute had run except for, because remember, it was 3 years before she wanted to try to get pregnant. 3-year statute in med-mal in Tennessee of repose, but this was a case of fraudulent concealment and assault and battery. That's what I tried the case on. So I tried the case, and the jury was filled with people from the hospital. I couldn't. It was as though they had just brought the whole hospital over. I took it up on appeal. We came back because obviously defense verdict. Tried the case the second time. I said, I want a racially diverse jury. They had one black called, and again, the jury is heavily laden with people from the hospital. I got my proof on, and the judge directed a verdict against us. And I took that one up to the Supreme Court, came back. The third time we tried it, we had a federal Supreme Court case out on diversity of the jury, and I told the judge, I said, I'm going to start looking to federal courts pretty soon if we don't get a fair jury. And the doctor then settled the case. But frankly, they settled the case, and my client was compensated. I did not take any compensation, nor did I take any of the expenses in the case. I just felt to me this was such a morally wrong thing. And sometimes you just do things because it's the right thing to do. And I said, I just think this was the right thing to do. The value of the case was not huge because Dr. King did a wonderful job reversing the sterilization, and she was able to have a child. I knew that going in, and I knew going in I probably was never going to get paid a dime. But to this day, I probably am the proudest of that case.
Well, that's super. Now let's talk about your involvement in bar associations and other legal organizations, because not only have you had this incredible career as a litigator, but you've been a trailblazer in the world of the bar associations as well.
Well, you and I together. I guess I'm so proud that our class was, you were the first president of the Tennessee Bar. I was a female president. I was the first female president of the Tennessee Trial Lawyers Association, that's now called the Tennessee Association for Justice. And that was a big deal in those days. That was not something that was easily, acquired. And I was very, very proud of that.
Well, the difference, I think, between the Tennessee Bar and the Association of Trial Justice is that the bar has gone on to have a number of female presidents, but you're still the only one.
I'm still the only one. And, it's a complex issue. I think that the defense bar, the corporate bar, the domestic bar are much more conducive to women to go into. To go into the plaintiff's bar, which is what the Tennessee Association for Justice is, means that you are going to be kind of out there on your own. You are going to be not always paid for what you do. It's not a billable hours often. You're going to be taking a lot of cases on contingency. You're going to have to put up a lot of money to do it. And there are a lot of people that just do not want to take that risk. So it's hard to attract women into that arena for some reason. And then when you do attract them in, I don't know why, but they don't seem to follow going up the pathway in organizations. But I think that's true in many areas today, where you and I may have had to pound on a lot of doors to open them. Because they're so easily open today, there isn't that burning desire to keep them open. And lately I have been really on my bandwagon about, you all are going to have these doors slam again if you don't push hard. Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed that doesn't happen.
That's right.
Talk to me a little bit about your legal career after you left Sid Gilreath.
Well, when I left, I was with Sid 7 years. And then I decided I would like to just open up my own law firm, control my own destiny. And so I opened a firm with 3 other fellas. They were up in Johnson City. And it just didn't work real well because they had a practice up there, and they coming down to Knoxville often was not very conducive to their building a practice here, which was what was supposed to be going on. And so we just parted ways, and I had the Davis Law Firm for 27 years. And, well, was it 27 years? No, I was with Sid 7, and then with the other about 7. And then I opened up my own firm, and in 2009, I believe, I decided I would like to start moving towards retirement. And at that point, Bill Vines at Butler Vines and Bab had discussed with me being a part of their group, and it worked out great, and I merged in there, and I'm still of counsel with that firm. Which is a really, really fine law firm.
So you have had the opportunity to work with some of the best trial lawyers in the state.
Yes.
You have also mentioned that Bob Pryor was someone that you considered a big mentor. Tell me
Yes.
about how you and Bob became friends.
Well, Bob is who got me into Sid Gilreath. Bob was a partner, Gilreath, Pryor, and Rowland, and Bob hired me to start doing medical consulting for him. And that's how Sid met me. And Sid started, doing it and all. But Bob is a wonderful storyteller. Anyone that meets him, just on the street, he can just mesmerize you with his ability to tell stories. A great communicator. And when I would be struggling with how to approach things, Bob could just lean back in his chair and he could just take off. And he taught me more about how to communicate to jurors and how to tell a story, which is what we're doing, and to do it in a non-legal way. It was always so much fun to be around him and to listen, to see his thought process and try to emulate it myself.
Well, another person that you have listed as being very influential in your life is someone that other people may not think of him in quite this warm and fuzzy manner, and that's Judge Cole, former Judge Cole. Tell us about Judge Cole.
Oh, I just love Judge Cole. When I was in law school, in those days, there was a class offered called Moot Court. And you were given a case, and you prepared it and tried it. And Judge Cole was my instructor. He was adjunct faculty at UT. And so, fortunately, at the end of the course, he would name the top 3 people in the class. And I was named the top number 1 student in his class, which was really a big deal to me. A very big deal to me. Well, when I got out of law school, the first case I tried was in Judge Cole's court. And I was a nervous wreck because I thought, I had listened to him, I had followed his instructions in the classroom, but I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to take away, he's going to ask for that certificate back. But fortunately, we won the case, and he did not take the certificate back. But he was always very kind to me, really kind to me. And I could drop in his office and say, I'm really not sure, if the case was not in his court, I'm really not sure how to handle something like this. Or, this happened with a judge. How would you think I should maybe handle this? Sometimes he would say, let it go to sleep. Other times he would say, I would walk back in and I would do such and such. He was a really wonderful man.
Well, now you mentioned that he had been adjunct professor. That's something you've done quite a bit of as well.
Yes. Now, not in the recent years, but yes, I did. I taught in the trial practice course over there, and then I also have been a guest lecturer in different classes at UT.
And you've continued to be very involved both as a volunteer and certainly as a financial contributor at the University of Tennessee Law School.
Yes. If I went to law school when the tuition was under $200 a quarter.
We certainly couldn't afford to go there now.
No, and I can tell you, but for private donors, I would never have gotten a law school education, because we all know the legislature only gives 30% of the cost of running the university. The rest is all private money. And I'm so grateful that I got that education, that yes, I'm a very strong supporter of the law school, and I will grab anybody's wallet that I can get money out of for the law school.
Well, there are other sides to your life that have been very fascinating to me, and that includes your love for traveling the world. Talk to us a little bit about how you've managed to see so much of the world at the same time maintain a successful law practice.
Well, you know, in the beginning, I don't think I took a vacation for 10 years because, number one, I had young children. Number two, I had no money. And, you know, you're working all the time. But I finally realized that balancing your life more is really important. And so I started taking a few trips to Florida, and I learned very quickly that FedEx could get to Florida very quickly, so that I would have to get far away if I really wanted to break. And that's when I started taking these trips all over the world. Now, I do kind of, as you know, kind of weird trips. I'm leaving on January 1st to go to Antarctica, Patagonia, and southern Argentina for a month, because I like to see how things are, not in the upscale cities, but out. You know, we go to a lot of, we've gone to the Arctic on an icebreaker. We've gone to the outbacks of India and all over 67 countries. And the way I balance it is this. Today it's easy. I take my phone, switch to international, and I have literally been on the roof of a riverboat going down the Nile River in Egypt and talking to 3 defense attorneys here in Knoxville, then calling my client, then talking to them and settling a very, very large lawsuit. And when they said, we'll get the documents sent over to your office for you to sign in the morning, I said, well, that'll be fine, except I'm on the Nile River. And they're going, you're kidding me. I have represented clients in Australia where I have done depositions where it is one day in Australia and another day here with the things. In fact, I believe you mediated a case for me where my client was in Australia and I was here, and we were literally going through money conversion and time changes and this and that. It's been a very exciting life. So travel comes into play even in your practice.
Well, talk to me a little bit about your family life these days. Your kids are no longer little kids?
No, they are no longer little kids. Number one, I'm married to a fabulous man, Ivan Belts. As you know, I have a son who, when he was 19, was seriously brain injured in a car accident. That certainly played a big part of my life in law, because he was in hospitals 3.5 years, in a coma 2 months. And the bar, literally, I worked out of the intensive care waiting room. Even the doctors in the hospital would bring me medical books so that I could work, and they'd say, just don't name me in one of your complaints. But I found how supportive a bar can be when you go through a terrible trauma. My son is fortunately 47 now, and he is doing very well considering the issues. Very, very well, and able to live independently, which is wonderful. My younger son is computer digital advertising company, and his stuff is flashing over Visit Knoxville and UT Stadium and all around town on screens. I'm very proud of them. And then I have 2 pretty terrific stepchildren too. We're very close family and able to enjoy a lot. But it's funny, now they are always calling me now with their businesses and things and say, Mom, you can't retire because you know, I need you to help look at these contracts for me. Who's going to do it? Or my stepson, who's a vice president of a big company, says, I need to be able to ask you questions. So that's kind of fun.
Well, I also think the fact that your one son is in the technology world is appropriate because you were one of the early people to adapt to technology.
Yeah.
And you've talked about how you've been able to use that to make your life easier traveling and things. But
Yes.
what led you to be one of the early pioneers in terms of moving your practice electronically?
You know, I think that I had a mother who was kind of a hippie beatnik kind of mom. She was an artist, but she was always looking at what was happening or where the world was going. She would always be talking about where the world was going. My dad was very technical, but my mom was kind of like this visionary. And so I always grew up with this idea of like, well, this is nice today, but what's tomorrow? What's happening tomorrow? And so when computers started coming out, the big ones, big mainframes, I say, boy, someday they're going to be small, and I want one. And the moment the Macs came out, I mean, I had a Mac that was like this tall, that wide, that sat on another part like this, and I had carry bags. I'd take them on airplanes with me and plug them in hotels. It was like this marvel. I don't know, I've just always loved it. And it's funny, my husband is a mechanical nuclear engineer, yet I do all the IT work. I'm the one that buys all the gadgets. I've just loved it. I've always loved it.
Well, in my recollection, Sig Gilreath's office was one of the leaders in technology. I
Yes.
remember when they first got the card things and
Yes.
would sort out all those cards, and we were all sitting there going, what on earth is this?
Well, that's it. And Sid, I think, has always been very cutting edge. He could always see where things were going. And you know, he would always say that to me. He would say, don't look at what the law practice is today. Look at where. You've got, and I would tell law students this all the time, you have to look at what's going on in your state legislature, what's going on in your community, because that's telling you how law is going to be driven. Because we are very driven by the public and by the legislature. And you better adapt your practice ahead of the curve for what's going on. I mean, when we saw the mediation coming in, I went and got certified as a mediator because we knew that that was going to be something in the future. I think that when we saw some of the medical malpractice legislation going in, you knew you had to diversify yourself into something else. And I think that law is always evolving, practices are evolving, and it's very important that we always be looking out towards the future and seeing where things are going.
Do you think the changes that the legislature have made in terms of the medical malpractice would have impacted your career? Would you have had to have gone in a different route as a result of the current restraints on medical malpractice cases?
Unquestionably. I think the tragedy of it isn't that as a lawyer I would not have work in that area, but that clearly is true. I think the tragedy of it is that it is allowing people to not be responsible for injuries that they cause. And that to me is the tragedy of the direction that it's going. There are going to be a lot of people out there who are injured that will not get compensation from the person who injured them, but will be the taxpayer's burden to care for because somebody's got to take care of these folks. And there's only, you know, when you don't have a job, you don't have insurance, somebody is going to be on the state TennCare plan, and people don't understand it gets passed to the taxpayer. And we shouldn't be so readily willing to take away responsibility from people. You know, I was raised to believe if you broke someone's plate, you replaced it. If you hit their car, you fixed it. You just accepted responsibility and you did the right thing. Now it's as though the legislature is trying to protect wrongdoers at the expense of people who are the victims. It's very bothersome.
Well, you've not only always been a champion for underdogs in your practice, but you have been very involved in community events and organizations that reach out to our community. Talk to us a little bit about some of the things you've done in the community.
Well, I sat on the board for Sertoma Center for Adults with Learning Disabilities, which is a wonderful, wonderful facility. I've been in breakthrough financially only through the autism program. But my husband and I deliver mobile meals, and we have just recently now agreed to do the fish deliveries also, which we very much enjoy doing. We've worked with a lot of different groups that have group homes for children. I've worked with, my mother established, financially she established, but then my sister and my mother and I all went and worked in a group of halfway houses for people recovering from drug and alcohol, called the Steps Houses, and involved in those. Recently agreed with Claudia Haltom's foundation, Step Ahead, to be involved with her group, which is, I think, going to be a wonderful thing for Knoxville. We're involved in church groups, things like that.
And do you ever have spare time? What do you do in your spare time?
I have lots of spare time now that I'm not working full time. I play a lot of golf when the weather's nice, which I've really enjoyed. I'm not very good at it, but I can hold my own with now. I really enjoy that. Of course, I spend a lot of time with our grandchildren, our children. We have 7 grandchildren, and so we spend a lot of time with them. Do a lot of things in the community. Then I have a lot of interest just in, it's things like I belong to a book club now that I never had time for before. I do a lot of knitting. I do jewelry making. I have just beginning to learn how to do metal work. Things that I've always wanted to do, but I never had time to do.
I don't know how anybody manages to do all of the things that you do, but I'm going to ask you this one question, and then we'll be wrapping it up. But what is, if you had a question that you feel like I should have asked you but didn't, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you've done a very, very thorough job. No, I guess the only thing that I have to say is that I think it's wonderful when we empower people to do for themselves, but we should never turn our backs on the fact that there are a lot of people that simply cannot do for themselves. And that we as a legal profession, I feel, really have an obligation to reach out and help people that either through lack of confidence, lack of education, lack of financial ability, whatever, need a voice to just make their life basically tenable. And I just hope that everyone will look at that in their life and do the old 10% tithe. Just tithe your time to helping others, and don't judge them, just help them.
And how would you like to be remembered?
For being a caring person, for promoting a profession that I agree with and believe in, a good mom, a good wife, a good friend,
Well, I think you have certainly succeeded on all those fronts.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.